Many of you know I come from a bit of a life sciences background, so I ran into this idea called genetic algorithms, and I'd like to share what they're about with you. So, let's dive right into it. What is a genetic algorithm? It sounds like a pretty complicated thing, but it's really not so bad, and hopefully by the end of this presentation, I'll have demystified it for you guys a little bit, and maybe you'll even feel confident enough to try rolling your own.
things got eerily quiet. We all heard sounds from around us, behind us, maybe 20 feet away. It was like a growl, then a hoarse laugh, almost like a lion, and then a hyena. We had a clear view of the entire area, and there was nothing, certainly not on the cliff tops where we heard it anyway. The creepiest part was that while David, Sarah and I all heard it from a close distance, Luke heard the exact same noise right by his ear. We ended up camping out to see if anything would happen, and this is when things got completely terrifying. Before, I was only scared of wild animals. We had guns though, and were sleeping with no bags nor tents. Just some blankets under the stars with a little fire. So I felt safe when we had all laid down, and I fell asleep pretty quickly. I woke up a few hours later to see everyone else laying down with their eyes wide open, listening. The canyon was completely full of noises. The only way to describe it is people banging rocks together. There would be one set, maybe 300 yards away, then another clacking 200 yards away, and then 50 feet away. The canyon echoes, so it was hard to tell exactly how many rock smacking noises there were, but they sounded like Morse code. We listened for perhaps 10 minutes. No other animal noises. No nothing. Finally, David, who is a hard-ass and the least superstitious of his family, shouted, "Shut up!" And everything immediately stopped. My heart was in my throat. We just sat there and stared at each other wide-eyed. It was dead quiet. And then we heard another super weird set of noises from the Anasazi ruins. I don't know how to explain this one either, but it almost sounded like a zebra, and then the rock/stick/whatever started up again. But this was worse, because now other animal noises came in. We heard what sounded like wolves or coyotes barking, monkeys screeching, owls hooting, and those terrible zebra noises. We said nope. We got our happy little asses out of there immediately. It took us maybe 10 minutes to douse the fire, pack our blankets and speed away, with the noises continuing the entire time. That night, I was obviously pretty shaken. Before I could fall asleep again, my Navajo mother came and sat by me, and said that she could tell I had a rough day. We hadn't mentioned the creepy shit to avoid a lecture about messing around with the spirits. She asked me about it, and I ended up spilling my guts about not seeing the canyon ruins. It was something personal. I felt like I wanted to go there. Why couldn't I go? It would have been beautiful. After I word vomited all over her, I could see that she had a really concerned look over her face. "What is it?" I asked, totally confused, and she explained something I had no idea about. The spirits in the ruins like to lure people. When they get up to the ground, the spirits push them off. That's why we don't go there. I remained creeped out for the remainder of the visit. The town has a public accessible kiva, kind of like a tourist trap for little podunk places. But since I didn't see the ruins up close, I went down via the kiva, and I went alone, as of course my superstitious family refused to enter other natives' dwellings. I figured that nothing could push me off a cliff if I were in a kiva. I was right, but something even worse happened. Fast forward a few weeks later, I worked at a shitty call center in Salt Lake City, third shift. It was my first night alone, and I was feeling jumpier than ever since the kiva. My brothers already warned me that I had a skinwalker following me, but I of course did not believe it. I don't smoke, but I follow my co-workers out for smoke breaks because I liked the chat. Tonight I lurked in the doorway because I had this horrible cloud of dread hanging over me. I was peeping out of the glass door and being a total weirdo, it hit me then how paranoid I had been. That's what skinwalkers do. They mess around with your mind. Whilst I was pacing in front of the glass door, I decided that this whole thing was stupid, and I was going to go outside and stand there for the rest of my 10-minute break. Most of the smokers were already filing back in, but I walked out, put my hands in my pockets and looked at the sky. I looked at the building, mentally patting myself on the back for not being a pussy. Then I saw something I will never be able to have a rational explanation for. We have 6 parking lots. In one of the lots far away from me, perhaps 100 feet away, I could see something walking. It was like a dog, obviously, but it was almost limping and walked like it were tired or hurt. Animal lover me forgot about skinwalkers, and I started walking towards it, making the ch-ch-ch, come here doggy, noises, and then I stopped abruptly. The dog had the body form of a greyhound, and it was grey, but there was something really wrong with it. It had bloody legs and limped, but it walked more like a person would on their feet and hands. Its butt was moving to and fro, and didn't make any sense. When it heard me, it just stopped without turning, something I've never known any dog to do, and finally, it looked over its shoulder at me, and this is the freakiest part. The dog was looking at me the way a person does. It had huge eyes, way too big for a greyhound, and its teeth were barred, as if it was considering biting me. Then it growled, but it was like a whistle growl, noises no regular animals make. It almost sounded like it wanted to talk to me, or that it was taunting me. Somehow in the middle of all of this, I realized it didn't have a tail, and I'd heard from all the Navajo stories that skinwalkers, when they appear as animals, don't have tails. Screw all logic and rationality. I turned and jetted. I didn't look back until I was inside the building and had pulled the door shut behind me. And when I looked back, of course, it was gone. When I described this to my brothers, they were absolutely sure it was a skinwalker. I then went through the trouble of blessing me, my apartment, them, and their apartments. I never saw the creepy bloody dog again, and have ever since never slightly wanted to visit those cliff ruins. This story belongs to a friend of mine. He told me this once, and I simply have to share it. My friend is of Wui-Queenux heritage, a Native American tribe who settled in the Pacific Northwest coast. He is quite a character. For one, he is a whopping 6'10", and has the blackest eyes that you could imagine. He always has this frowning face going on, which makes him even more intimidating. He is everything but a bad guy. In fact, he is the most gentle of giants. He was working at a gas station up in North back in 1992. He has pretty much always worked the graveyard shift, from 11 PM to 7 AM. Business wasn't exactly booming at nights, so he was usually watching TV or reading magazines between customers. And there were a few. This area he lived in and worked in was deeply associated with all things Native American. There was a potent sense of pride in the surrounding communities, but also a very distinct presence of superstition and old traditions. My friend was no exception. He was a firm believer in all things of the old. This made his encounter even more terrifying. One night, he was sitting as usual watching TV when a customer entered the gas station. The customer paid for his gas and a pack of smokes and some soda and returned to his car. Nothing unusual. But as my friend looked out the window towards the customer's car, he spotted what looked like a huge dog sitting by the edge of the woods. Now the window is located out on the side of the building, some distance from the sliding door, and overlooks the pumps and the roof covering it. On the sides of the roof, there are pretty strong halogen lights, which shine in to the gas station. This gives the gas station not only eerie lighting, with the blinds casting long, stripped shadows, but also blinds the teller to an extent. As he peered through the window trying to focus on the dog, it was gone. He didn't think much of it. Even if it were a wolf, he was inside, and wolves don't tend to rob gas stations at night. Wolves were common here, but this wolf was huge. He brushed it off and returned to his mindless show on TV. A couple of hours go by, and not a single customer had entered since the last. He was about to refill some condiments when he heard a large thud coming from the back. It wasn't inside, but he could hear it. It came from the back, and behind the building they kept the garbage. The gas station has been visited before by scavenging homeless, but my friend didn't really care. It wasn't his garbage, and it was just garbage. Let them take it. But it kept getting noisier. He decided to grab a flashlight and a gun from the office and circle around the back to tell whoever was venturing there to leave. He had had enough. His presence alone would have scared off anyone, but he wanted to feel safe just in case. He exited through the sliding doors, walked past the window he was sitting by, and as he turned the corner, he shines his light towards the dumpster. As the cone of light hits the dumpster, my friend instantly drops the flashlight and the gun. It's the huge dog he saw before, scouring through the garbage. It wasn't a dog though. It clearly stood on its hind legs, reaching the same height as himself. It could not be a bear. It was too gaunt. The creature's eyes had been glowing in the light of the flashlight, making it even more terrifying. He ran inside the gas station, and he wasn't followed. He locked the door and stayed in the whole night, and quit the very next day. My friend is still convinced that he saw a skinwalker, a shape-shifting shaman of sorts that are common occurrences in Native American lore and culture. I don't think he ever plans on working nights again. In my late teenage years, I came into some money after my father committed suicide, and I received an inheritance from him. At the time of my father's passing, he and my mother owned a cabin up in Oregon by Mount Bachelor. The cabin had been put up for sale since my mother could no longer afford the payments, and renting it out would not cover the payments either. The cabin was set to go on the market for sale in less than a month, and I was in the process of finalizing all the paperwork with the realtor and the lawyer. So for that month's time, the cabin was not going to be rented out any longer and was going to be vacant. I saw this as a chance to get away for a while and clear my head in light of all the things that had been going on. I quit my job, packed up my snowboard gear, grabbed my dog, and headed up in my dad's car, which he had willed to me. Now this was our family cabin that my parents rented out throughout the year when we were not using it. I had keys, as well as all the codes for the alarms, so I did not feel the need to inform the rental management company and advise them of my stay. My first 2 days at the cabin were normal, and nothing out of the unusual happened. I spent my days playing with my dog in the snow, snowboarding, and in the evenings playing PlayStation or listening to music, as well as drinking and smoking out on the balcony. I had already stocked up on food, cigarettes, and liquor, so I was pretty much shut in aside from the occasional out to hit the slopes. With my dog as company, and DVD/PlayStation for entertainment, I was quite content, and started to feel relaxed after all the drama that had preceded my outing. The cabin itself was 2 stories. Bottom story had the living room and the side guest bedroom, along with a small kitchen. The upstairs had another 2 rooms, along with a walkout balcony attached to the master bedroom. Most of my time was spent either in the living room, kitchen, or master bedroom. I never ventured into any of the other rooms, and always kept the doors leading into them shut. Anyway, the 3rd day came around, and I was going through my usual routine of playing with my dog, his name is Midnight by the way, playing video games, and watching DVDs. That day, it was pretty heavy snowfall, so I did not feel like trekking down the hill to the main road in order to use my car, and decided to stay indoors. That's when things began getting a bit weird. In our area, there were only 2 other cabins adjacent to ours, maybe a block away from each other. All other cabins aside from these 2 were around a mile away from ours. Surrounding us was mostly forest and very tall pine trees. Both of these cabins had been empty for the past couple of days, and I knew that no one was currently occupying them. Around midday, whilst outside with my dog, I noticed what looked like footprints in the snow around the area surrounding our cabin. It was still snowing, so the footprints looked semi-fresh, as if someone had been there in the last half hour or so. I thought that maybe it was someone who was staying in a cabin near me, and that perhaps I hadn't noticed. Maybe they were shut-ins like me. Alright, whatever. The prints lead away from my cabin, and they disappeared into the snow towards the denser part of the trees. I disregarded the footprints and went back inside. Nighttime came around, and I decided to head to bed. My dog Midnight was laying on the bed with me, when I noticed his ears perk up into a listening position. This was followed by him jumping quickly off the bed and running downstairs into the living room. I lay in bed and stayed silent. I could hear him moving around downstairs back and forth, and after around 5 minutes, he ran back upstairs to me and started to do his doggy dance as a sign that he had to pee or wanted to go outside. Shit. Well, fine. I can't say no to him, so we both went downstairs to go outside to the driveway for him to do his thing. Only, he didn't want to pee. As soon as we were outside, he started to pull on his leash, trying to drag me to where he wanted to go. He kept looking into the denser part of the trees, where the prints had been earlier. But he also kept sniffing out on the side of the house, and looking up towards the roof. After he figured out that I was not going to go where he wanted me to, he sat himself down and just stared into the darkness. This was a bit unusual for him, but perhaps there were animals out in the forest, and he fancied chasing them. I, however, was not in the mood for chasing any animals, so I pulled him back inside, and we both headed back upstairs. Around half an hour later, I was laying in bed when I heard what sounded like hooves walking on my roof. It was only a series of around 6 steps, and I rationalized that it could be a pine cone falling from a tree onto the roof, or maybe a kind of hearted forest animal running around. But here's the thing. The steps seemed to be spaced apart, like a man's length stride. So it was really freaking me out. Midnight was also hearing the noise, and was quick to run to the balcony screen door, with the expectation of me letting him out. Alright, you know what? I'm a tough guy, and at the time considered myself to be fairly well built and strong enough to handle myself. So I grabbed my coat and shoes, along with my cigarettes and flashlight, and went out to the balcony. As soon as I went outside, I lit up a cigarette and started canvassing on the roof with my light. Nothing there, and the snow on top was undisturbed. Weird. Could it have all been in my head? What about Midnight hearing the noise? Could he be feeding off my paranoia? I started to calm down and relax again, and that's when my eyes started to adjust to the darkness. I kept smoking and just stared at the stairs and trees next to our cabin, and that's when I saw it. In a tree that was a little taller than our cabin, that was around 20 feet from the balcony, I saw what looked like a man crouched in a squatting position in between two branches. It was squatted on a branch, and its arms were extended above its head, holding onto a branch above it. What the hell is that? I wasn't sure if I was really seeing this thing, and just stood there staring at it motionless. I noticed Midnight stand up and stare, pacing behind me and lightly barking at the same time. The thing did not move. I put my cigarette out and was debating on shining the light in the thing's direction, but something in my head kept screaming not to, so I walked backwards to the inside of the room and pulled Midnight out with me. Once I was indoors, I locked the door and shined the light in the thing's direction, but there was nothing there. I shut the curtains to the screen door and retreated to bed. But later on in the night, I heard tapping at the screen door, like someone was tapping the glass with their fingers. It was consistent and did not stop for nearly an hour. Midnight seemed to stare at the door, but he wouldn't go near it anymore. The weirdest part was I had a feeling as if someone was trying to invite me to open the door, but at the same time, I kept hearing my dad's voice in my head telling me to stay in bed and to not move. I listened to my dad's voice and just stayed there where I was. I eventually passed out and woke up in the morning and everything was normal. The rest of the week I spent there was non-eventful, and nothing else out of the ordinary happened. I totally admit that it could have all been in my head. A lot of stuff had been going on, and I was pretty messed up from all the drama. But still, how did Shadow know the thing was there if it was in my head? I've heard a lot about coyotes and skinwalkers, and had a weird experience or two with coyotes. The creepiest being that they went up to my sleeping bag and were sniffing around us without us hearing them during the night. But never anything paranormal, so to speak. My friend Patrick's story, however, kept me going back to a favourite backcountry secret stash. He was leaving the area one morning. He had been camping out there a couple of days and said that there was a coyote that always seemed to be close by, in his peripheral vision but never overt. He loaded up his truck and started to drive down the washout to the fire road. At the end of the wash, he could see the coyote following him. When he pulled onto the road, it was running next to him. Now he was freaked out, so he sped up and said he was going at 35 or so, and it was running along beside him. Definitely not possible. When he looked back, the coyote was running on two legs and was wearing what Patrick said looked like buckskin pants. An instant later, it was a person wearing a coyote fur, keeping pace with the truck. He looked again, and it was gone. We never went back to the grove after that. Too freaky.
When I was 11 or 12, we lived in a small house made of mud and stone, a lot like our house now. It was 2 of my brothers and I in the house. Everyone else had gone to the James feast and left us to tend to the sheep. We were getting ready for bed when we heard the dogs going crazy outside. Thinking it was nothing more than coyotes howling in the distance, we told them to be quiet. We began to drift off into sleep, and the dogs would not shut up. Somehow, I was able to go to sleep for a few hours. Then I woke up very late in the night. It was very quiet and still in the house, save for my brother's snoring and breathing. I realized I needed to use the outhouse and woke up my brother to take me there. He teased me about being scared, which I certainly was. We went out with our flashlights to the outhouse. The dogs began with their crazed barking out in the sagebrush, going from one place to the next. My brother went first, and I waited outside for him. While waiting, I tried to follow the dogs with my flashlight. Suddenly, there was a very loud whine from one of the dogs. Then, everything went quiet again. It was really too quiet for that time of year. Not even the sheep were making noise. Suddenly, I heard a few of the dogs going completely mad by the truck. When I looked over, there was this man. He was unbelievably tall, leaning one arm on the cab roof of the truck. He was looking at the dogs for a little, and then suddenly kicking one of them. They all scattered in different directions. The thing looked up at me, and I saw its face. It had a pure white face, like a full moon, 2 burning red eyes, and a slight smile that was pure black. I could not move or make a sound. It began to walk toward me with long strides, until it finally towered over me. All I began to see was a dark red, like the color of blood when you cut the throat of a sheep. I kept getting deeper and deeper into its eyes. I could faintly hear my brother coming out of the outhouse. With this, the thing looked up at him. Reality came rushing back to me. I noticed that my brother was too distracted with his buckle to realize what was going on. I also noticed this thing's long hands hovering just inches from my head. Its skin was